Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Starfighters Rapid Fire from Alleycat Games. Starfighters is a 1-to-4 player game that feels like it's primarily designed as a 2-player head-to-head experience, but it does have a solo mode, it has a multiplayer mode, but in it, the game is basically a real-time, dice-rolling game in which you're trying to destroy your opponent's spaceship. That's the core idea, you're trying to destroy your opponent's spaceship in the game. In the game, players are going to be simultaneously rolling dice. Now, obviously, because I'm playing a single player here, I'm just going to roll for one player, but players will be doing this simultaneously, rolling dice as frantically as they can in order to activate the various engines of the ship. And I'm just going to go ahead and rapidly do this here. I'm going to go ahead and put that there. I'll toss another one of these up here. I'll throw these down over here into torpedoes. I'm going to go ahead and roll again quickly, throw these two over here, and I'm going to roll, and I'm going to immediately shout stop, okay? Stop, done, or fire. Technically, you're shouting fire. Basically, you're rolling dice as fast as you can, sliding them into your various places on the board, and then calling fire to trigger the round. Effectively meaning that you get to determine the speed and pacing of the game. You get to determine how frenetic things are. You get to determine the pressure that gets put onto your opponent in the game. From there, the players are going to go ahead and take turns activating. The players, starting with the player who called fire, players are going to take turns activating various zones on their ship. And to that end, there's 3 basic aspects of the ship. Well, 4, I guess. There's going to be drives, which is how you move and rotate in the game. There's going to be missiles, which you go ahead and launch torpedoes that are going to go towards your opponent turn after turn, whether or not you are continuously, whether or not they make it. They're going to be slowly moving across the battlefield. There'll be lasers that are instant hits against your opponent, and then there's going to be the shields, which is how you repair your shields so that you don't die in the game. Players are going to go ahead and take turns activating those zones. So for example, maybe I go ahead and I spend this yellow die, and the way these dice work is they have different symbols on them. Basically, blue goes on blue, red goes on red, yellow can go anywhere, and then there's specific types of symbol that either go on the HUD where they have to be utilized to activate a module, or on these spots where they can be used to activate the module as well. You need a combination of a spot and a HUD to be able to activate a section. I'm not going to heavily go into the exact way the dice work because it's a lot of explanation for a little payoff there, but basically you have to assign dice here and here based on the symbols, and blank dice won't help you. So I'm going to go ahead and resolve the drives over here. So I'm going to cash in this yellow die, which can be used for any color. It's wild, effectively. And I'm going to go ahead and move forward twice, and I'm going to turn left once. So I'm going to go ahead and go once, 2, 3. So I'm going to do 1 turn and 2 moves in the game. Then my opponent could take a turn. Let's pretend they had some dice over here. Let's pretend they went 1, 2, and, turned as well. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and drop my torpedo. So I'm going to activate those 3 over here to drop a torpedo. It's going to go into the board. I'm going to drop it right over there, perfectly positioned to be able to strike them next turn, depending on how things go. Now, the torpedoes do launch without actually activating this turn, so the enemy does have some time to react. And let's pretend on their end, they had some lasers over here. I'm going to go ahead and give them some dice over here. Let's pretend they had a die over here. They had this up here, and they had 2 dice over here plus a range 1, because the way lasers work is lasers shoot at range 0 by default, so range right around the ship, range 1 I guess you want to call it, but then you could add more dice to increase the range. So effectively, if you have enough dice over here, you can make a range 3 laser, and you can also go ahead and power it up with the right dice over here. You need yellow at this point, but you can power up with overcharge in order to be able to activate the overcharge, which makes your wild symbols roll for twice the damage. But pretend we don't have that. Pretend we just have a regular 2 range over here. So this is going to be in fact, let's do it like this over here. So we activate this, pull this off, and then roll these 2 dice with our increased range, and then boom, there we go. We got 2 hits against the opposing ship, and we specifically have them on this side of the ship, which means they're going to go ahead and pull off 2 shields from that specific orientation. Where you pull the shields off from does matter in the game, because eventually, once you power through the shields, you will be hitting your opponent directly on their hull, which is how they'll eventually die. That's basically the game. You're going to go back and forth until your opponent dies. But a few other things to go into it. Basically, once you go ahead, you can continue rolling dice over here. Going to the next round, I think I'm rolling some of their dice, unfortunately. I'm going to quickly put one of the dice up here. These all cleared over here. I used all these. I'm going to quickly toss, another one over here. And let's go ahead and toss an extra range over there. Roll these over there. We got that. We got that. Boom. Toss that. We'll throw that in there. We'll roll this. We'll pop that over here, and we call fire. Boom. Again, same idea. You're trying to desperately call fire to be able to take one out of your opponent. And in this case, because my opponent, we're going to go ahead and reactivate my torpedo over here. Because my opponent's over there, I'm going to go ahead and be able to spend this die over here to activate both of these, and so I'm going to activate these 2 dice, and if I roll any wilds, they deal 2 damage. And look at that, boom, that's 3 damage directly to my opponent's aft over there, so I'm going to go ahead and take off 3 damage in there. They're going to go ahead and force me to be able to move 2, which they're going to have to do, because let's pretend they had movement dice, so we go ahead and put these dice over here, and they go ahead and activate 2 straightforward, putting those off in order to go 1, 2, which is essential because they're trying to escape my torpedo right now, because at the end of all our activations, torpedoes are going to move 1 space, trying to chase your opponent down. And if there's a choice, you can go ahead and activate there. And the torpedoes will eventually deal 2 damage to your ship, which means launching a few torpedoes and letting them slowly hunt down your enemy can be an effective strategy to keep them on their toes and to force them to engage with movement in the game. Past that, there's going to be the shield zone. Shields is a way you can actually repair your shields. You can assign dice over here, and then use a HUD die over there to be able to repair your shields, but each time you do so, the cost becomes increasingly more expensive, until eventually it's going to cost you 6 dice to repair your shield, making it a very, very hard thing to keep up with the impending damage. Once your shields are gone, more damage to that side of the ship will start dealing damage to your hull, until eventually a player dies, the ship goes boom in space, and then one player is left who wins the game. That is how you play Starfighter's Rapid Fire, which means it's time for the review, starting off with ease of play. Rulebook for the most part, fairly straightforward, not an overall hard game to learn. There's some small aspects that I don't think the dice placement was the clearest way of how it actually works, but once you get a few rounds in your belt, it also seems to make sense. The only problem is, of course, you're playing real time, so I do recommend doing a few rounds of dice rolling just so players can get a feel for things, rinse, reset, and start off playing from there. Past that, as for the game time itself, it's a fairly quick moving game. It's a fairly quick moving game, coming in at generally the half-hour mark or less. It's fast moving, you're rolling dice, you're assigning damage, you're zipping around the galaxy. There are these wormholes, by the way, I didn't talk about them, but you have adjacency through these wormholes as well on the board, but it's a very fast moving experience. As far as what I like, don't like, I can see others not liking in the game, starting off with what I like, which the calling fire to me is the biggest aspect of the game. There's not a timer on the game, there's not some sort of set clock, there's your decision of when to call fire, and when you first start playing the game, you think that calling fire happens once you've effectively assigned your dice. I assign all my dice. Once I've done so, I call fire, and we move to the next phase, but that's not how you play the game, or at least not how I play the game. I play the game by trying to figure out the worst thing I can do to my opponent, assigning those dice, and immediately calling fire as soon as I think I've done what I need to do, regardless of the fact that half my dice aren't assigned. Oh, look at that, you just put your lasers in place and you want to lock in your drive, but I have a torpedo on the board who's hunting you down. I immediately assign some lasers, call fire, boom, I'm rolling more damage against you, and my torpedo hits you because you didn't have time to assign your movement dice, and so calling fire is the biggest thing to me in this game. Get a good turn and get one turn ahead of your opponent, set yourself up for success, and then just keep them on their toes. Force them to prioritize that they have to rush away from combat because they know you're going to keep calling fire on them, and the ability to force your opponent to set themselves up in a bad situation, and then worse, to know that you're continuously doing it, that to me is where this game shines, because if it's just a rapid rolling dice kind of, experience, at the end of the day, it doesn't have that much decision space going on in the dice themselves, because there's lasers, there's shields, there's movement, and there's missiles. There's just not enough areas to actually strategize around the dice themselves. So you have to find the other areas to strategize around, which for me is calling fire is going to be one of them. And a big one is rotating and turning your ship to take on damage where your shields are stronger. Because you can last 2 or 3 times as long as your opponent if you prioritize that as a key concept of what you're doing. Sure, running away can be effective. You know what else can be effective? Turning your ship, taking the damage, and shooting your opponent back, not worrying about the fact that you just absorbed a missile, and now they just have 3 damage on their front face, which is already weak. And so calling fire, rotating and turning the ship, those are 2 big aspects of the game that give you a lot of room to actually strategize in what is otherwise a very fast-moving, rolling dice, simultaneous play experience. There's also the back and forth of action resolution is a big deal, and again, calling fire gives you that leg up as well. If you call fire, you go first, you take that first action, you launch your torpedo, you run away, you do what you need to do, but from there you go back and forth, you resolve your actions in turn order, which gives you a fun sense of trying to figure out what the order of action resolution is based on what you think your opponent will do. Sure, it might be better to go ahead and shoot those lasers right now. The problem is you know that maybe dropping your torpedo might be the better situation on the board, maybe moving away is the better situation because there's a missile hunting you down. There's always different things going on, and choosing what the right action is at the right time is a big part of the experience. Plus, the slow movement of the torpedoes through space, having a few torpedoes on the board can really add a sense of tension to the experience, especially because with the right maneuvering, you can actually have an opponent have their own torpedo blow up their own ship. If you have a torpedo over here at the right moment over here, the torpedo will try to go through yourself to hit your opponent if it's the fastest way, and yes, that will hit your own ship, which doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it's an incredibly satisfying experience, and so having those few torpedoes on the board to give an additional sense of tension to the experience is a fun extra thing being added. As far as what I don't like in the game, I kind of touched upon this already, but there's very limited scope of what you can actually do in the game. There's not a ton going on here. It's rolling dice, there's 4 core actions, a lot of it comes from trying to find those additional areas to pull additional strategy from the game, but hey, you're shooting lasers, you're going to be shooting torpedoes, you're going to be moving around the board, and it's a very small board, and then occasionally you'll recharge your shields and stuff like that, and so the core game experience just doesn't give you that much to do. This is a game that is, well, we'll talk about it in more in final thoughts, but there's enough here to find find that there's more rewarding going on than at first glance, but there's still a limit of how much is actually going on in starfighters. This is a roll dice fast, assign them, do damage to each other, rinse and repeat until the game's over without that much going on, which just limits that kind of experience, which kind of puts it to me in a kind of a one and done kind of experience. Not actually one and done, but like, you know, you'll get like, I don't know, a handful of plays out of this. I do not think this has legs as far as the amount of gameplay going on. There's not additional cards, additional powers, there's not additional modules or missions or anything in the game past roll dice fast, hurt your opponent, do so more effectively, rinse and repeat. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, it is more of a two-player experience from what I can see. I mean, again, there is a solo mode, there's a multiplayer mode, but it's primarily designed as a head-to-head experience, which is not a problem for me. Just, you know, if you see 1 to 4 players on the box, make sure this is actually rated well as a 1 to 4 player game. Otherwise, it's primarily designed as a two-player experience from what the game is trying to do. And then secondly, I'll say that the real-time aspect of the game is something that you have to be okay with or not. That does mean that some players will get stomped where others don't. If you can rapidly assign your dice, if you can rapidly roll your dice and see where you have a good roll, if you roll this kind of roll right here, being, again, going back to the whole aspect, you're trying to decide in real time, you roll this over here, this is a beautiful roll, but somebody else doesn't necessarily see that. What I see is over here, I'm going to go ahead and pop these down here, go there, hit fire, call it, done, I am moving on, and I'm launching a missile, and I don't think you're doing anything this turn. That can be incredibly helpful in the game, and so the ability to see the rolls that actually work for your situation faster than your opponent is desperately trying to figure out what they can do. This is real time, and if you don't like real time, or if you can't pick it up fast enough, the game's not going to be kind to you because someone else will just stomp you slowly into the ground. As far as final thoughts on Starfighter's Rapid Fire, I overall enjoy this game with some degree of progression to it. When I first started playing this game, I did not like it. I did not like it one bit. I was almost mad at the game. I was like, there's nothing going on here. There's no sense of agency. You roll a few dice, you shoot some lasers, you shoot some missiles. This is a terrible experience. As I started to realize the nuances of turning a ship, the nuances of calling fire, some of the additional elements of the game that aren't necessarily as obvious at first, I started to appreciate it more, but with the caveat that there's still only so much that the game is letting you do here. This is not a game that gives you a ton of games. This is a game that gives you a handful of games, in my opinion at least, before it starts to wear thin as far as the amount of decision space, the amount of interesting things going on. So I both appreciate elements. I've had fun with it. I think there are fun times, fun moments, but to me I think this is kind of like a board game library, board game cafe experience, a fun one to try, a fun one to find those little areas to push a little further on, but not one that I'd consider a keeper. For me, this is a 3 out of 5. It's got some interesting elements, some things I enjoyed, but not a game that I overall was too impressed by. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for another lightweight kind of battle game that has a bit more going on, Robot Quest Arena from Wise Wizard Games is going to be a deck-building combat skirmish game that will work at 2 players, but will work at 3 and 4 as you try to smash and pound robots into the ground. And if you're looking for a real-time game that had some interesting elements in it while being very accessible, I thought Wild Style from Pandasaurus Games was a very charming game of trying to find the right areas to place down your tokens to score as efficiently as possible while maintaining that real-time kind of almost like a spit-like mechanism of grabbing cards as fast as you can in the game. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.